This morning I'm spending some time talking with one of the most professionally recognized psychologists here in the Keys, Dr. Stephen Ragusia, and we're talking about the common colds of mental health, depression and anxiety. Now, before we get back into depression and anxiety, could you give my viewers a little bit more about your background?
Well, I've been a clinical psychologist for about 35 years, and I've taught at Penn State and Harvard Medical School. I am past president of the Pennsylvania Psychological Association. I'm chair of the Ethics Committee of the Florida Psychological Association. I'm board certified in family psychology, and I also specialize in neuropsychology and forensic psychology.
Okay, great. Your resume is so impressive.
Thank you.
Now, let's get back into depression and anxiety. We've spent some time talking about the treatment options. Could you get back into that with us, though?
Sure. Let's take a specific example of one, okay? One kind of anxiety that bothers people a lot, that's very severe, is what's called panic attacks. And all too often, quite frankly, the medical community tends to use anxiolytics, anti-anxiety drugs, to treat panic attacks. And that has lots of dangers with it, and the treatment is essentially infinite. You may have to take anxiety drugs for the rest of your life, or at least for many years. Panic attacks are one of those disorders that psychologists can treat most effectively and fastest. We can successfully treat panic attacks 97% of the time in less than 10 sessions. And my own experience is I personally, as a clinician, typically take 3 or 4 sessions to cure panic attacks. What panic attacks are is really the fight or flight response gone crazy. You know, your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother was walking along the plains and she ran across a saber-toothed tiger. And that tiger started to chase her. And she had one of two choices. She could either run as fast as she could back to the cave and hide, or she could pick up a rock or a stick and try and beat the snot out of that tiger, you know? So she did one of those two things. In order for her to be successful at one of those two things, she needed lots of energy to the large muscle groups, to the arms and legs. And there are various physiological processes that need to take place in order for that to happen, to create strength in the muscles. So without going into all the details on this show, because we only have a few minutes, we know that she was able to be successful because she lived long enough to reproduce.
Right.
So those genes were passed on to her daughter and her daughter and her daughter, et cetera, down the line. Now, what the fight or flight response involves, partially, is simply breathing really fast and having all the blood rushing to your intestines and then to your large muscle groups. Okay? Now, that's great when you're fighting a saber-toothed tiger. The problem is that when you're loaded with that particular group of genes that makes it successful for you to practice the fight or flight response, when you're living in 21st century Key West, you're running very few saber-toothed tigers, okay? Right. So as a result, your body's programmed to deal with the danger using large muscle groups, when normally what we need to do in our society is use our frontal lobes, the thinking, reasoning, rational part of our brain, to come up with a solution to the problem, okay? So for example, if you get pulled over by a police car driving down Highway 1 and you see that little magic light going behind you, what happens is your heart starts beating really fast, you start breathing hard, and you start having symptoms that are typical of a panic attack. Your palms start sweating, you may feel like you're going to lose consciousness, you may feel a little bit faint. In extreme cases, you may feel like you're going to go crazy, or your heart's going to beat so hard you're going to die, you know? Now, when the police officer comes up next to you, I don't advise you to either run away or try and beat him up, okay?
Don't do that.
Don't do that. For the kids at home, don't do that. But what you want to do is come up with a way to explain to the police officer why it was you had a reason to go fast, you know? Maybe your mother's dying in the hospital or something else, and then maybe what will happen is they'll give you a break, and the police officer will just give you a warning. So rather than use that kind of fight or flight response that's built into us genetically, we want to deal with things rationally. Now, in people who suffer from panic attacks, what happens is they get scared, they start having those symptoms of breathing hard, heart pounding, palms sweating, feelings if they're going crazy or they're going to die.
Right.
And it gets worse and worse and worse and worse, and pretty soon they really feel like they're going to die.
Right.
And that goes on for about 15 minutes. Now, using psychoeducation, cognitive therapy, okay, and relaxation techniques, we can teach people how to stop those panic attacks within a few sessions.
Wow.
Sometimes within minutes. So there's an example of one particular kind of anxiety problem and how to fix it.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us this morning. And we're running out of time right now. We have to take a quick break, but we'll be right back after these messages.